Is a top 2 primary an open primary? What about a top 4? Are you sure? It's early January of 2022 and a ballot measure campaign to establish an open primary election has begun in Oregon. The press release includes the actual ballot measure language.
In all publicly funded elections for state and federal office, the state shall only select candidates for the general election by conducting an open primary election.
Where it says open primary election, that must mean a top 2 or top 4 primary election, or maybe a top 5, right? Let's Google the phrase, open primary election, just to be sure. The first website is called fairvote.org, and their website reads,
In an open primary, voters of any affiliation may vote in the primary of any party. They cannot vote in more than one party's primary.
Something isn't quite right here. In 2010, voters in California adopted a top 2 open primary for every public office except U.S. president. Party primaries were abolished. In an open primary state, no one can vote in more than one primary, because there's only one primary. Let's try another website. The next one is the National Conference of State Legislatures. Sounds official.
In an open primary, voters may choose privately in which primary to vote. In other words, voters may choose which party's ballot to vote.
Once again, they're talking about party primaries. That's completely wrong. In an open primary state, party primaries are abolished when the open primary is adopted. There's also a separate heading for top 2 primaries. Let's see what that says.
California and Washington use a top 2 primary format. The top 2 format uses a common ballot, listing all candidates on the same ballot.
That actually sounds accurate, but apparently, a top 2 primary is not an open primary. There's even a table under the heading, Open Primary, that shows all the states with open primaries, and neither California nor Washington are on the list. Alaska has a top 4 primary. It isn't on the list either. Let's try one last website, ballotpedia.org. It reads,
Top 2 primary systems, such as those utilized in California and Washington, are sometimes classified as open primary systems because voter participation in such primaries is not tied to partisan affiliation. For the purposes of this article, a top 2 primary is considered a separate entity.
According to this website, a top 2 primary is not an open primary. A top 4 probably isn't either. At best, the ballot measure to establish open primaries in Oregon is legally ambiguous. It probably can't be enforced in a court of law. It also explicitly outlaws an open primary tracking poll because a tracking poll is not an election. If you're totally confused, don't worry, you're supposed to be. It's no accident.
Well, I for one am totally confused, and I'm just reading the websites. Can you explain how any of this is possible?
The 2 major parties have spent millions of dollars over the last 4 decades on a massive propaganda campaign to obfuscate the phrase, open primary. In a traditional closed primary, voters must declare their party affiliation when they register to vote. In recent years, however, many states have adopted relaxed registration requirements. This is called a 3R, closed primary. In addition to voter registration, voters are given additional opportunities to declare their affiliation by simply requesting a political party ballot. In the semi-open and semi-closed variants, voters must typically request a ballot by filling out and returning a special form. In the so-called open primary variant, voters can request a party ballot on election day at the polling station. In each case, the election is still a closed primary, only the method of declaring party affiliation has been modified. Referring to one of these elections as open is just false propaganda. It's a deliberate attempt to confuse voters. In contrast, an open primary tracking poll is real election reform, not false propaganda. And unlike a top 2 or top 4, a tracking poll can be used for the U.S. presidential race.
If you actually believe in free and fair elections, and are looking for a legitimate campaign to support, visit lincolnprimary.org and learn about open primary tracking polls. Join the mailing list and make a pledge to support a 2024 ballot measure.